So we have the quiz on completing the square from last week. Now, I tell you up here that you can use other methods besides completing the square if you want, right? You can use completing the square on anything. Completing the square works on any single quadratic equation. Is completing the square easy? It's pretty easy if you have a b value that's even. If it's odd, that's when it becomes very difficult. But right here I'm saying you could use other methods. In other words, you could factor, split, and solve. So you could pick one. Any one of these guys. Pick one, guys. 5? Okay, 5. You could simply factor. What is factoring? It's a reverse distributed property. You could pull out an x. What do we have left? An x plus 3 equals 0. Now because I know that this is something times something equals 0, well, the first something could be equal to 0, or the second something could be equal to 0, right? And those are your answers. I'm sorry. This is your answer, but this one could still be solved. Subtract 3, x equals negative 3. That's your answer. So those are done really quickly. As a matter of fact, all of these on the first 6, you could factor, split, and solve, or you could do some easier method. What do I mean by easier method? Check this out. Square root, x equals, don't forget the plus minus, 3i. And I saw a lot of people put the I in front of the 3. I have no idea why. It's 3i. Cool? All right. So always try to factor first. That's a great way. Number 6, could you factor? Yeah, you could. What times what is negative 6 that if you add together is positive 1? Plus 3 times negative 2, right? And when you split it, you're going to get two answers. X equals negative 3, x equals positive 2. And those are all worth 1 point, right? Super easy. Why are these guys worth more than 1 point? Because it requires more work. When you try to factor this guy, when you think, okay, let me try to factor. What times what is negative 6 that if you add together is positive 3? The only way you could get a negative 6 is 1 times 6 or negative 2 times 3 or changing those signs. And clearly neither of those gives you a positive 3 when you add them together. So factoring simply does not work. So right here you have to complete the square. But now that we know quadratic formula, we don't need to complete the square anymore. Okay? We could use the quadratic formula. So let's do the quadratic formula. First of all, what is the quadratic formula? There it is, x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac divided by 2a. Now, the quadratic formula is beautiful. Why? Because it doesn't matter what kind of equation, it doesn't matter what kind of answer. You could have nice answers, right? X could equal 2 and x could equal negative 5. You could have irrational answers. You could have square roots in your answers. You could have imaginary answers. This formula will solve any quadratic equation. I'm talking any quadratic equation. You could always fall back on the quadratic formula. Kind of like you could just always fall back on completing the square method. It's just completing the square method is a lot tougher when you have a b value that's odd. So I wouldn't want to do completing the square method right here because of this 3. Okay? Because when you take half of it, you get 3 halves, and you square it, you get 9/4. Then you're dealing with 9/4. It gets a little ugly. So the quadratic formula always works. We have the quadratic formula. Now let's start this out by replacing the variables with parentheses. So we should start with those parentheses. And now we should also go back and identify A, B, and C. What's A? A is 1. What's B? B is 3, right? And what's C? C is negative 6. C is negative 6. So when we plug in our values, the B value is 3. The A value is 1. There's the A right here and there's the A right there. And the C value is negative 6. And that's step 1, and it's great so far. Now let's just simplify. Now what should we start with? We should always start with the discriminant value. And I'm already throwing out that vocab word, even though it's not till the next section that we need to know. Actually, tomorrow that we need to know the discriminant. Discriminant is this inside value. The b squared minus 4ac, that's a discriminant. So we always start with this. and we start with exponents, so that's a 9. And then 4 times 1 times 6, that's 24. And a negative is a positive, so that's really going to be a plus 24. Are you with me? So let me rewrite this thing. I have a negative 3 plus or minus the square root of 9 plus 24. Again, why is it plus 24? Because you have a negative and a negative, and a negative times a negative is a positive. Okay? And it's still over the denominator. 2 times 1 is 2. We might as well do that math right there. So I've simplified. The rest is pretty easy, I think. 9 plus 24 is 33. So you really have negative 3 plus or minus the square root of 33 divided by 2. And guess what? We're done. That's it. We're done. So yeah, I'm not doing this video for you guys to correct your quiz. This is not a quiz correction video. You want to learn how to correct that quiz, how to do completing the square, go back to last week's videos and watch the video of me doing this type of question, the same exact question, you could find it, and it explains it with completing the square method. But this is a lot faster, a lot easier. We're done. Now, like I said, if this square root of 33 would have been like the square root of 20, you'd have to continue working. Like if it were the square root of 20, you'd have to break it down to 4 times 5 and then split the root and get 2 square root of 5. But that's obviously not the case here. Okay, so if the 33, the square root of 3 was the square root of 20, you'd have to replace the square root of 20 with 2 square root of 5. Okay, but that's not the case here. So any question on last week's quiz could have been done with the quadratic formula. Would you guys like to see another one from the quiz? $17, $18? Sure, why not? $17, $18. What's the A value? A value is 3. What's the B value? B value is 2. What's the C value? C value is negative 1. That's good that you guys are including the sign. Perfect. Okay, so we know the formula. Okay, there it is. Negative B plus or minus square root of B squared minus 4C divided by 2A. And then now we're also going to replace the variables with parentheses. And after we replace the variables with parentheses, let's actually plug in the values of, okay, so we start out with negative B. The B value is 2, so we just put a 2 right there. The B value is 2, put a 2 right there. And then it's 4AC, so the A value is 3, put a 3 right there. The C value is negative 1, so put a negative 1 in the C. Over 2 times A, the A value is, oh, it's not 1, I'm sorry. That A value is 3. And once again, we focus in on the radicand value, the discriminant value, the value inside the square root. And when we do that, we end up with 4. Is it going to be a minus or a plus? 4 minus or plus? Plus, because you have 2 negative signs. A negative times a negative is a positive. Now, if this would have been a negative 3, you'd end up writing 4 minus, because a negative and a negative and a negative is a minus. So we really have 4 plus what? 12. Okay. And let me zoom out a little. And let me fill in the rest. We have the plus and minus right in front of the square root. We have the divided by what? 6. And in front we have a negative 2. Okay. Continuing with the inside of the square root, 4 plus 12 is 16. Whoa, sorry. Let me move this up. So we really have negative 2 plus or minus the square root of 16, bless you, over 6. And what is the square root of 16? 4. So we really have negative 2 plus or minus 4, bless you again, over 6. Now we know that those are all numbers that we could actually work with, so let's do it. Let's go negative 2 plus 4 over 6, and let's go negative 2 minus 4 over 6. So on the top situation, bless you again, negative 2 plus 4 is 2 over 6, and that reduces down to 1/3. So your final answer is 1/3, and the bottom one is negative 6 over 6, and that's negative 1. So those are your two answers for that question. So in this case, we ended up with the square root of 16, which we could do. So we did it, and we continued, did the positive and the negative situation. So let's jump to number 13, 14 on the video, on the quiz from last week. And let's not do completing the square, even though you're supposed to do that. Let's do the quadratic formula on this guy. So the quadratic formula. And once you have that formula, you got to replace all the variables with parentheses. And then we're going to plug in our A, our B, and our C value. So our B value is -2. Everybody check this out. There's a -2 in there, a -2 in there. And the A value is 1. 1 right there, 1 right there. And the C value is 4. Okay, so we're again going to start with the discriminant value. So -2 squared is 4. And you're going to have 4. You're going to have a plus or a minus? A minus.
No.
Right? So 4. Oh, the first one's positive. Okay, so let's start by doing the square root. You have a 4. Then you're going to have a plus sign. No, not a plus sign. I'm sorry. A minus sign. And 16. Because 4 times 1 times 4 is 16. And let's rewrite everything. Minus 16. So you have 2 plus minus the square root of 4 minus 16 over 2. And 4 minus 16 is what? -12. Thank you very much. So we have 2 plus minus the square root of -12 over 2. This is a great problem. Let me tell you why. The square root of -12 could be simplified. So we need to do that. Let's go to the side over here. Let's do -12. Now, first of all, the negative sign inside a square root is going to end up being an I on the outside. And then 12 could be rewritten as 4 times 3. You see, 12 is not a perfect square number. 4 is a perfect square number, so you want to break it down to get 4 times 3. Now, 12, it would be pointless to break down to get 2 times 6. Neither of those are perfect square. So you're going to split the root, the root on the 4 and on the 3, and you're going to end up with I times the nice number 2 times the square root of 3. So you're going to rewrite it as 2I square root of 3. With me? So what we just found was that the square root of -12 is really 2I square root of 3. So we're going to actually replace the square root of -12 with 2I square root of 3. So that's my next step. I want to go 2 plus minus 2I square root of 3 over 2. And now, what do we notice about all those terms that we see there on that fraction? There's a bunch of 2's, right? So you could split them and say, okay, 2 over 2 plus minus 2 over 2I with the square root of 3. And then you could cancel the 2's, and you end up with a 1 plus or minus. Now, since we have I square root of 3, you could write it I square root of 3, or you could write it square root of 3 with the I at the very end. But that's your final answer right there, guys. Okay. We could have also recognized, hey, all 3 terms up here have a 2. You could just cancel out those 2's right from the start, and you'd have a 1 right here, plus or minus I square root of 3, which is your final answer anyway. I hope this helps.